After I expressed frustration yesterday to my 15-year-old son, who decided to use my grinding wheel to sand a piece of wood to the point where the wood was charred and the stone wheel was coated in wood residue, I reflected on the nature of our financial system and the role that gold plays and Bitcoin may also play in the future. Yes, I reflected on the comments left for me on my last video too. I know it's an odd connection, but bear with me. Humans are somewhat unique among other species in many ways. We have the ability for abstract thought. We have a well-defined language. We have a sense of time. And we can create and use tools. Proper use of tools can allow humans to achieve great things. Improper use of tools can lead to some rather poor results. A stone grinding wheel can hone a chisel, but it can't really sand wood. A torque wrench can be used to install the drain plug in a car just to the right amount of tightness to allow the gasket to optimally perform, but it can't be used to drive a nail into a board. I hope my 15-year-old son is listening. I say all this because, just as it is with mechanical tools, there are financial tools, each with their own best use. Use them well, and they can help a person achieve great things. Use them poorly, and it will yield to poor results. So it is to our benefit to study these tools so that we can learn to wield them with proficiency. My knowledge of gold and banking evolved over many years. Many years of deep thought and study. Now, I won't claim to have all of the answers, but I like to think that I've developed enough knowledge of both the banking system as well as to gold to put them to their best use, at least in my own life. It used to be that I had a deep resentment of fiat currency and the fractional reserve banking system. Over time, my thinking has evolved to the point where I view people who count the digital credits stored in their bank account as their wealth, the same way that I view someone who uses a grinding stone to sand wood. They are well-intentioned, but just naive about the nature of the tool that they are using. Meanwhile, I go about my business, accepting those digital credits as pay for my labor, spending those digital credits for groceries and monthly bills, and purchasing gold, which I store away to count as my wealth. And you know what? The grocer and the electrical company have always gladly accepted my digital fiat, as has my coin broker. The system works for me, and it has been very effective. So why do I claim that my use of fiat currency and gold is more sophisticated than the person who has no use for gold in their life? It really comes down to years of study of history and of what has worked and what has not. Fiat has had a history of failure, mainly because those who manage it have never been able to avoid the temptation to create more fiat in an effort to create the illusion of prosperity. Has the person who saves in fiat been harmed? Yes, but only insofar as he or she has been deprived of the knowledge of fiat's ultimate failings. Do I hold this person in contempt? Not at all. I only hold in contempt modern financial pundits who vehemently discourage gold ownership, especially when they suggest holding bonds to reduce the volatility of a portfolio. In my view, gold's highest and best use is as a reserve asset. It sits there, very quiet, waiting to be sold when needed to provide settlement. It is rarely used, but having it puts me in a much stronger and secure position than not having it. I don't use it for day-to-day transactions. Mobilizing it frequently would require too much effort and energy. In addition, the value density of gold makes it inappropriate for all but larger transactions. This is physical gold, of course, not digital gold. These seeming disadvantages that I've come to appreciate are actually advantages when gold is used as a reserve and not as a currency. I've found that the effort involved in spending gold makes it much more likely that I'll be careful with my savings. It's a forced discipline of sorts. This inconvenience of using gold for day-to-day transactions is the primary reason why currencies were invented. At one point, they were simply negotiable paper records of ownership of gold and silver on deposit. Gold and silver, which were once used in exchange, transitioned to become reserve assets that were transferred infrequently to settle accounts. Meanwhile, the paper circulated. Eventually, computer digits replaced the paper records for most transactions. The efficiency of this type of system allowed commerce to grow faster than it otherwise would. However, it was fraught with failure. Each time confidence was lost and depositors demanded their reserves back, they would find banks unable to comply, mainly because the money was lent out, causing a mismatch of term. You see, when you lend out money, you can't expect to just have it back and available on demand. And depositors failed to realize that by depositing their money in the bank, they were authorizing the bank to lend the money out. The depositors, who benefited by earning interest, just didn't understand the nature of the tool that they were using. The simple fact of the matter is that you can't have a system that promises interest to everyone and at the same time promises redemption upon demand to all. Such a system is doomed to fail. The only reason bankers believed that this could work was the notion that not everyone would demand their money back simultaneously. Eventually, due to banking failures, the system evolved to the one that we have today. The digits that we hold on account are only redeemable for paper notes, which represent first liens on the gold held by the Treasury, but they're non-redeemable, at least not on demand. The banking system, when necessary, can request that the Bureau of Engraving and Printing create new paper notes. Thus, in the event of a bank run, where everyone demands their reserves, the system can simply create the paper needed. Now, you and I know that this is ridiculous. Such a system leads to inflation as well as episodes of rampant inflation. But so long as the majority of the rest of the people have confidence in that paper, the system can hold together and serve our day-to-day purposes. You and I can continue utilizing the banking system for day-to-day transactions. Meanwhile, our gold sits safely out of the system, very quiet and very still. I suspect that this is a secret known by many wealthy families, as my own personal interaction with one of them revealed a long time ago. Enter Bitcoin. From what I understand about Bitcoin from reading the original white paper penned by a person going by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto, the intent of Bitcoin was to create a network that would create a decentralized system for validating peer-to-peer transactions. It was to facilitate exchanges between individuals using a network of computers to validate the transactions without requiring the involvement of third parties as an intermediary. Doing so would eliminate some of the frictional costs associated with fraudulent online transactions. Now, it's interesting to see how the community around Bitcoin has evolved. While most of Nakamoto's paper focused on eliminating fraud on the part of the buyer and seller, very little was said about the author's judgment on the banking system itself. The only things I picked up were Nakamoto's mention of Bitcoin being inflation-free once the predetermined number of tokens were circulated, and some mention of the benefits of privacy. I sense from the things that I have read from other authors regarding Bitcoin, just as I do many authors on the subject of gold, that there is a strong desire to eliminate what is considered to be a fraudulent banking system run by an evil cartel. While I do sympathize, I don't necessarily agree that the existing banking system is without utility. I suppose I would feel differently if I was not free to use the banking system for my convenience, while maintaining my reserves outside of the system. And this brings me to my video from last week, where I discussed how much electrical energy is currently being consumed by the Bitcoin network. Now, I did receive a lot of agitated comments, but I also received some very well thought out counterpoints. To the people who presented polite counterpoints, I wish to express my gratitude. I appreciate your thought-provoking comments, though there were far too many to reply to all of them. I did give them careful thought this week. However, to avoid offending, I chose to stop replying so that nobody felt that I was being dismissive of their comments specifically by answering some and not all. To those who spewed venom, I'd like for all of you to know that, yes, your comment was dismissed without much thought at all. Now, all that said, my video was not really meant to be a hit piece, despite my cheeky quip at the end about my gold not consuming power. So sorry about that. I do stand behind my conclusion that Bitcoin is very power intensive. And that is a bad thing if the intent is for it to be a high transaction volume currency, but a good thing if it is going to function as a reserve asset like gold. Now, I did read quite a few comments regarding the scaling of the transactions without a proportional increase in power. From what I could gather, it seemed to me that the mechanisms by which this can happen is similar to the aggregation of transactions prior to ultimate settlement, which is the same way that the LBMA aggregates transactions and then settles with the retitling of gold at the end of the day. Of course, I could be wrong. There is a lot of material to read on the subject, and not being an expert, I'm bound to draw some faulty analogies. And so my opinion on Bitcoin as a tool is still that it's better suited to be a reserve than a high-volume transactional currency. Is that a bad thing? I don't think so. I like my gold just fine, even though it rarely leaves the vault, and when it does, it suits the purpose to which I put it. Could a person do the same thing with Bitcoin? I have no doubt. Could a person use both gold and Bitcoin simultaneously? Sure. I don't see a reason why not. Now, why is there a competition between the two camps? Maybe that has more to do with the inherent human need to feel validated by the tribe than it does logical arguments. What I do not see as clearly is where the value of Bitcoin will ultimately settle. It could be much higher as more people adopt it, and it could be much lower as its popularity fades. One thing I know for certain is that in the interim, its value will oscillate greatly. And because of this, and because I don't see gold's role going away, I stick with gold. Now, I may be missing out on a fortune, but that's okay. I've already built my fortune through hard work and savings. I hold no ill will towards those who choose Bitcoin, unless, of course, they go out of their way to deride gold ownership, like the founders of the dropgold.com internet site did. And this leads me to my announcement. This channel is not going to turn into a cryptocurrency channel, but since my main focus is on providing information to those who are seeking alternatives to the mainstream financial world, I would like to continue this conversation. But I need to do so with the help of someone much better versed than I am in all things Bitcoin. I'm going to enlist the help of a good friend of mine who years ago saw great promise in Bitcoin and has devoted much of his time to studying it and much of his savings purchasing it. I hold him in the highest of esteem and plan to do a jointly produced video with him answering subscriber questions. Perhaps one, maybe a few, I don't know. So what I will ask of you is this. If my video today has inspired your thinking, if you have questions and topics that you would like to ask about how gold and or Bitcoin can be used as stores of wealth, please feel free to post a question or topic. I'm sure there will be lots of comments posted, and so he and I will go through all of the questions and comments and select the ones that we find that pique our interest and are of a related nature to serve as topics for our discussion. Now, if we don't get to them all, we might decide to do multiple videos. I guess we'll just have to see how this first little experiment goes. So thanks in advance for your questions and comments. As always, please be polite and respectful, even if you disagree. And that's one thing that I find really sets apart my community. So thanks again for your participation.